So what if the greatest evils in history weren't actually committed by monsters, but by nobodies? What if the real capacity for unbelievable destruction isn't found in some deep-seated hatred, but in something much quieter? A simple, terrifying absence of thought. This is the story of a trial that put not just a man, but the very nature of evil itself on the stand.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1961. The city is Jerusalem, and the whole world is basically holding its breath, waiting for this historic moment of reckoning. After 15 long years on the run, one of the main architects of the Holocaust is finally about to face justice.
Everyone thought they knew the answer to that question. They were expecting to see a villain straight out of a storybook, right? Some demonic figure whose evil was just written all over his face. They were waiting to look into the eyes of a monster. But what they found instead was something so much more disturbing.
The man sitting in that glass booth was Adolf Eichmann. As a high-ranking SS officer, he was the logistical mastermind behind the final solution. This was the guy who managed the transportation of millions of people to their deaths in concentration camps all across Europe.
The sheer drama of his capture is just incredible. After the war, Eichmann had completely vanished. He was living under a fake name, Ricardo Clement, working at a Mercedes-Benz factory of all places. Israeli intelligence agents finally tracked him down in Argentina, literally snatched him off the street, and in this wild operation smuggled him all the way to Jerusalem to stand trial. The world was finally ready to confront a face of pure evil.
Now, watching all of this from the press gallery was one of the 20th century's greatest thinkers, the German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. She was there reporting for The New Yorker, and she was determined to understand how this catastrophe could have happened. And she, just like everyone else, expected to find a monster.
And this right here gets to the absolute core of her discovery. Arendt had written before about this idea she called radical evil, a kind of evil so extreme it tries to make human beings completely unnecessary, to just erase their very humanity. It's the evil of death camps and totalitarianism. So she expected to see the architect of that evil in Eichmann. But as she watched him testify day after day, what she saw was, nothing. Not a diabolical mastermind, but a man who is terrifyingly, horrifyingly normal. Not radical evil, but something she would eventually call banal evil.
This quote just cuts right to the heart of her shock. Eichmann wasn't some perverted sadist. He wasn't a snarling villain. He was a bland, mediocre careerist. And for Arendt, that normality was, as she put it, much more terrifying than all the atrocities put together. Why? Because if he was normal, then, anyone could be.
Okay, let's really dig into this. How could a normal man possibly be responsible for such monstrous crimes? Arendt's whole analysis zeroed in on the way he thought, or maybe more accurately, the way he didn't.
Arendt argued that Eichmann's single most defining characteristic wasn't stupidity, but thoughtlessness, a complete and total lack of critical reflection. He didn't have that inner conversation with himself. He never once stopped to ask, wait a minute, is what I'm doing right or wrong? He just did his job.
This profile just paints a picture of profound mediocrity. Eichmann was a joiner, a guy who was desperate for a sense of belonging and purpose, and he found that in the Nazi movement. He wasn't driven by some deep evil belief. He was driven by ambition. He wanted a promotion. He didn't even speak in his own words, just in bureaucratic jargon and these pre-packaged cliches. Arendt pointed out he was genuinely incapable of uttering a single sentence that was not a cliché. The judges thought his empty talk was just a cover-up for his hideous thoughts, but Arendt realized the emptiness was the point. This thoughtlessness showed up as this staggering lack of empathy. Get this, when he was organizing the deportation of Austrian Jews, he genuinely believed they were all pulling together. Why? Because the Nazis wanted the country cleansed of Jews, and the Jews, he figured, wanted to emigrate. He couldn't even conceive of their terror or their loss. He was just physically unable to think from any perspective but his own narrow administrative one. So all of these observations, his normality, his thoughtlessness, his use of cliches, all of it led Arendt to her groundbreaking and, frankly, hugely controversial theory. Now, the banality of evil doesn't mean that what Eichmann did was commonplace, or that his evil was somehow less evil. No way, the deeds were monstrous, but the doer, the man himself, was banal, common, ordinary. His evil had no depth. It wasn't some deep-seated passion or a demonic impulse. It was, as Arendt wrote, a manifest shallowness. It was the evil of a man who simply gives up his ability to think for himself.
And you can sort of see the process, right? It often starts with an ideology, in this case Nazism, that gives you a simple, all-encompassing story that frees you from the burden of actually having to think. Once you stop thinking, you lose the ability to judge. And then horrific acts, like organizing train schedules for death camps, they just become normalized. They're just items on a to-do list, an administrative challenge. And that is how ordinary people become agents of extraordinary evil.
So what does this stunning 60-year-old analysis of a Nazi bureaucrat have to teach us today? Well, Arendt's report from Jerusalem wasn't just about history. It was a warning.
What this all shows us is that the real danger isn't always the loud, goose-stepping fanatic. It's the quiet conformist. It's the person who outsources their conscience to a system or an ideology or a leader. Arendt showed us that refusing to think, refusing to judge for yourself, isn't a neutral act. It's the precondition for evil. That simple act of stopping, reflecting, and having that inner dialogue, that is a profoundly moral act.
You know, at the end of all her reflections on Eichmann, Arendt was left with this question. And it's a question that kind of flips our entire understanding of morality on its head. We often think of morality as a set of rules you follow. But Arendt is suggesting it might be something more fundamental, a habit of mind, the simple, constant activity of thinking.
And that's where this leaves us. If an ordinary man's thoughtlessness could help murder millions, what does that say about the importance of our own attention, our own critical judgment in our own lives? Maybe Arendt's most enduring legacy is this challenge, that in a world so full of noise and easy answers, the most courageous and necessary thing any of us can do is simply to think.